And I hope you'll stick with us, believe it or not, all 3 hours. It's one of those shows. I know what's coming. You don't, but I know what's coming. You know, it's interesting in The Democrat Party Hates America. I have 2 chapters relating to Democrat Party racism, anti-black racism and anti-white racism. But in both the chapters, I talk about the Democrat Party and anti-Semitism. Those of you who have and have read the book know what I'm talking about, but many of you have not, so I want to talk about this a little bit. And this is a kind of show where we need to go step by step and integrate one part with the other. And it all makes sense when I'm done. So the watchword here is patience. My wife says I have no patience, but the watchword here is patience. In early September 2016, writes Rabbi Yaakov Menken, managing director of the Coalition for Jewish Values in The Observer, he says the Obama administration reacted angrily to a video in which Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu pointed out that the Palestinian Authority, intended to be, I can't even see, unfortunately, Judah Varon, ethnically cleansed of Jews. The State Department willfully distorted Netanyahu's remarks, asserting he was promoting Israeli settlements and reiterating its false claim that those settlements are illegal. In other words, the Obama administration twisted a statement about Arab bigotry against Jews into a perceived injustice against Arabs. Later this same month, Obama delivered his final address to the United Nations General Assembly. And he said in part that Obama, and surely Israelis and Palestinians will be better off if Palestinians reject incitement and recognize the legitimacy of Israel, he said, but Israel recognizes that it cannot permanently occupy and settle Palestinian land. While Obama's words may sound to the untrained ear as if Obama was striving for balance, these 2 phrases could not be further apart. Apparently, the Jewish people are the only indigenous people, I write, that Obama, the Democrat Party ruling class, and their ilk do not recognize. Mencken says, Jews lived in the area Jordan labeled the West Bank continuously for the past 3,000 years, save for brief periods when they were massacred and the survivors were forced from their homes, most recently by the Jordanian army in 1948. Arab land, so-called, tacitly endorses Arab ethnic cleansing of Jews. In fact, Obama was disastrous for the state of Israel as he was for the United States. He denied Israel arms for a period when it was under attack. He signed an agreement with the terrorist Iranian regime that ensured its acquisition of nuclear weapons and threatened Israel's existence. He directed his Secretary of State, John Kerry, to abstain rather than vote no on another anti-Semitic UN resolution against Israel. And he attempted to unseat Israel's elected Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, and treated him disrespectfully when he visited the United States, and much more. Remember, this book came out in September. Biden has picked up where Obama left off, reversing President Trump's pro-Israel policies. He negotiates with the Iranian regime in secret, reportedly promising tens of billions of dollars in financial relief and acceptance of Iran's substantial advances in nuclear weapons development. He bypassed the Teller-Force Act, which prevented United States funding of the Palestinians unless they stopped using the money to reward the families of Palestinian terrorists for murdering Jews. Teller-Force was a former U.S. Army officer who was part of a Vanderbilt University tour group who was stabbed to death in a terror attack that left 10 others wounded in an old section of Tel Aviv. He delivered, did Biden, hundreds of millions of dollars to the Palestinian Authority and much more. And Biden has done next to nothing to address the growing anti-Semitism, remember this is in September, in the Democrat Party or on Democrat Party supporting college and university campuses. Came out 2.5 weeks before the October 7 attack and what you're seeing breaking out. The editors of National Review, in an editorial titled Time for Democrats to Address Their Anti-Semitic Problem, explained that anti-Jewish attacks did not spring forth in a vacuum. Increasingly, the American left has gone beyond mere criticism of the Jewish state, of the sort that is made against other nations, and adopted the kind of virulent strain of anti-Israel rhetoric that was once mercifully relegated to the far-left college campuses. In this environment, squad members like Ilhan Omar, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Rashida Tlaib can falsely accuse Israel of being an apartheid state and of empowering U.S. military aid to target civilians and children, a new spin on the old blood libel, and experience almost no rebuke from their own party. And this is September. The NR editors continued, the intense opprobrium, save for Israel, and spared authoritarian nations such as China and Iran, betrays the progressives' less moral corruption. And rather than react in dismay, New York Times progressive columnist Michelle Goldberg lamented that attacks on Jews might undermine the Palestinian political cause. Rather than distance themselves from violence conducted by their allies, former Bernie Sanders surrogate Amir Zar implored progressives in a video and tweet to stop condemning anti-Semitism. He said, "You are not helping. You are playing their games," meaning the Jews. "It's a distraction." Instead, he urged followers to say free Palestine and nothing else. Says a Sanders right-hand man. Czar needn't worry. Most progressive politicians who did bother denouncing the recent wave of violence against Jews diluted their rebukes by also condemning rising Islamophobia. You know what, Mr. Perdue, this book was really prescient, was it not? Creating the impression that advocates of both sides of the Israeli-Palestinian debate were engaging in violence, which is needlessly to say a myth. Indeed, for American Marxists and the Democrat Party, anti-Semitism fits neatly into their political and ideological narrative. Writes National Review, there is little political upside for Democrats to call out the squad. Polls show a party that has lurched leftward and become increasingly antagonistic towards the Jewish state. As Iran Harsi Ali recently noted, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict feeds into many of the progressive left's ideological biases. The narrative of the oppressor versus the oppressed, of the colonializer versus the colonialized, of the genocide perpetrator and system of supremacy. And do the Democrat Party leaders condemn what is taking place among their ranks? When it comes to Ilhan Omar and company, where's Nancy Pelosi? Where's Chuck Schumer or Dick Durbin? To this point, nowhere to be found. It is, of course, true that neither left nor right has a monopoly on anti-Semitism. These days, however, one party, writes National Review, is increasingly under the sway of a noxious, all-encompassing hostility toward the Jewish state. The Democrat Party, I point out, is not only tolerating anti-Semitism, it is promoting it. Not so with the Republican Party. Nonetheless, the Democrat Party, and again, attempts to project upon the Republican Party and others the bigotry and hatred that have always defined it in one form or another. This is typical of arrogant, autocratic parties and regimes which use propaganda to distract and manipulate events. Jonathan S. Tobin, editor-in-chief at the Jewish News Service, responded to an effort by a Democrat-aligned writer to paint former President Donald Trump and the Republican Party as the real home of anti-Semitism. He says, to the contrary, Trump was not only the most pro-Israel president ever, but surpassed his predecessors in opposing anti-Semitism on college campuses, and had closer ties to Jews than any other previous president via his family and close associates. The claims that he never condemned right-wing extremism or had endorsed the neo-Nazis who marched in Charlottesville, Virginia in August 2017, which continue to be voiced by the left, were simply untrue. The argument that Trump somehow encouraged anti-Semites on the far right with his trolling of his critics and foes on Twitter, as well as in his speeches, was pure partisanship. It's also hypocritical, since it's the sort of charge that is never applied to liberals, like Biden, who are also prone to hyperbole and dishonest attacks on their opponents. Tobin declares, and I quote, "The reality of contemporary politics is the GOP is a lockstep pro-Israel party with philo-Semitism in the norm." Philo, supporting Jews, is the norm. The opposite is true of the Democrat Party, whose intersectional left-wing embrace of critical race theory has driven growing hostility to Israel and support for ideologues in the Black Lives Matter movement that embrace the idea that Jews are white oppressors. And rather than isolating their extremists, the party's progressive wing and pop culture and media cheering section have embraced them. Tobin explains that for many on the left, their goal is to redefine anti-Semitism in a way so as to label the demonstration of Israel and the Jews as legitimate discourse rather than hate speech. And I meant demonization, not demonstration. Indeed, Biden has a history of treating the state of Israel, this is me, the only Jewish state in the world, and established after World War II and the Holocaust, as a second-class country. Now, keep in mind, the state was established, but the Jews have always been there. So we have people who do pop history lessons on cable and so forth, and they want you to believe it all started in 1948. Obviously, it didn't. Just open your Bible. He speaks down, does Biden, to its elected leaders, that is in Israel, when those leaders are members of the Likud party, Israel's largest political party for the last quarter century, and it's conservative. It's also Israel's most prominent conservative party. On June 22, 1982, Senator Biden confronted then-Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin, by the way, one of the great leaders of the Likud party, during his Senate Foreign Relations Committee testimony, threatening to cut off aid to Israel when Begin refused to accept Biden's demands on how to run his country. You see, Biden does this all the time. The Democrats do. And I'll get into this later. This is why I'm laying the foundation for you. Just be patient with me. Begin looked directly at Biden and said, "Don't threaten us with cutting off your aid. It will not work. I am not a Jew with trembling knees. I am a proud Jew with 3,700 years of civilized history. Nobody came to our aid when we were dying in the gas chambers and ovens. Nobody came to our aid when we were striving to create our country. We paid for it. We fought for it. We died for it. We will stand by our principles. We will defend them. And when necessary, we will die for them again, and with or without your aid." How profound today. The same Joe Biden with another prime minister out of the Likud party. Today, as I point out, Biden is at it again. Again, this book came out in September. Like his former boss, Obama, Biden is actively undermining Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, his coalition government, and the state of Israel as it faces down the Iranian terror state and its nuclear weapons development and Palestinian terrorists. The Wall Street Journal editorial board recently asked, why does President Biden go out of his way to snub, criticize, and give marching orders to the government of Israel? At least rhetorically, the president and his administration treat Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his governing coalition worse than they do the ruling mullahs in Iran. Tom Nides, Mr. Biden's departing ambassador to Israel, chimes in that the U.S. must speak up to stop Israel from going off the rails.